Welcome to Thrive, the podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Ahmad Jooma, the creator of Shukman, a fictional character that helps children and sometimes adults transmute fear into connection, compassion, and joy. In this episode, Ahmad shares his journey of transformation, of embracing his heart and creative spirit to become the artist he truly is, and in doing so, in being his true self, help the world transmute fear into love. Before that conversation, however, I have a brief invitation for women entrepreneurs who have been experiencing frustration, burnout, overwhelm, anxiety, and unfortunately at times ill health. The wounded entrepreneur in a woman takes her lead from her unconscious unworthiness, has substituted her real needs by insulating herself with money, and makes do with a loss of connection in pursuit of success and upholding that success. We pay the price for this with our vibrancy or authentic self-expression, and as we feel misunderstood, we end up isolated, and that can lead to becoming brittle, belittling, or critical of ourselves or those around us. If push and demand have become your mode of operation in building your business or life, it's time to take a breather. In 2024, I will facilitate Thrive in Entrepreneurship to help powerhouse creative women who want to set up their own thing or are redesigning their thing, ditch the burnout, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the separation, so that they can start or continue their entrepreneurial journey with ease as their lives and relationships thrive. However, right now you can book Clarity for Christmas, a half-day one-on-one with me that will give you the clarity, that will free you from the burnout, and that will stop you from going off track. So if you've been feeling eroded in your confidence, one-on-one with me will give you the clarity and the confidence you need in 2024. Right now, these Clarity for Christmas sessions are at a very special Christmas rate. So the details for booking this early Christmas gift are in the show notes. And men, if your woman has been going through this and you've been witnessing it and feeling like you want to, get away from the pressure and the frustration that she's experiencing, book this as your Christmas gift to her, as a support to you both. You can thank me later. Thank you for listening. And now for the main conversation with Ahmad. Ahmad, welcome to Thrive, the podcast. I'm delighted that you're with me today. I came across your work because someone introduced me to Shukman. In fact, it was Lucy. She mentioned that you have this creation called Shukman and that you utilize it to work with children and sometimes adults. Now, when she mentioned it to me and I just had a little look, I immediately felt ignited and excited. And so I knew we were onto something there and that you were onto something. And here we are today so that you can share with us, the creation of Shukman and also the journey that you've been on and how intuition has been powerful for you in allowing yourself to receive your creation and to bring that to the world.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into this and to share more about what I've created.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about Shukman. Where did it all begin?
So Shukman for me was something that actually, it really is one of those stories of when we talk about intuition and finding our truth. It wasn't something that I necessarily took seriously in the start. It was more of a game that, or something that we shared amongst friends, where we'd be out and in a club or something, and we want to go over and talk to a girl, and there'll be that little voice that chimes in our heads and tells us, how it's going to go horribly wrong, or she's probably going to reject us or something like that. And so we'd share that with each other in the club. We'd be like, oh, I want to go over and talk to this girl, but Shukman's telling me she's probably got a boyfriend, or she's going to throw a drink in my face, or something's going to happen. And then I started noticing that, it's not just in dating, it's in every aspect of life. But it wasn't until 2016 that I had the intuition to draw Shookman. Like it never had occurred. Yeah. So it was quite a thing to sit down, and I didn't have any idea of what he looked like, but I actually went with intuition. I completely just went, all right, blanked my mind and just went with it. And the Shookman that's here today is pretty much is no, not pretty much, is exactly how he was drawn, just more refined from back then. And that's how it got started. But between 2016 and now, like I have better understood the idea and more how it's used in education.
So Shugman it's almost like a slang term, right?
Yeah,
Origin. Yeah.
that's
And,
right. Yeah.
and you've actually created Shukman to be an actual character.
Yeah. I actually have a little Shookman doll here. So
Kind of scary. Pretty scary,
you know
actually.
what? It's funny that you say it's scary because kids find this cute.
Really?
Yeah. And I find adults find Shookman scary, and kids are just like, oh, wow.
So they can
What's
embrace their fear a bit more than we can.
Yeah, well, you know what? Like, it's an interesting point, and I know we're slightly deviating already, but like when growing up, if you ever watch any cartoons, the bad guy was often scary looking. I'm thinking of like Thundercats or these things, and we never actually had nightmares necessarily about these characters. But as we grow into adults, for some reason, we really recognize that as scary.
Hmm. So tell me about that journey, how you began listening to, oh, hold on a minute, there's something more here. This is not just a joke between friends. This is not just a way to help each other or egg each other on or whatever it would be.
Yeah, I think like because I've done a lot of self-development, what started becoming obvious was the parallels between the ideas of Shookman and identity. And often we talk about ego or the shadow. And so what was obvious to me was Shookman's representative of that. And what I had created was something that we could look at, something that we could see, that we all recognize as being either the inner critic or the shadow or the ego. And so, like I said, since 2016, it was kind of like I was better understanding the depths of that for myself and exploring what that meant for me. But then also in doing that, I was understanding what it meant to others. And on the other side of things, like recognizing the value of Shookman, what I realized is every single time I spoke about Shookman or shared the idea, people's eyes lit up, people were intrigued, they were curious, they liked it, and that's how I was like, oh, this is something, this is something real, this is something useful.
Mm-hmm. So you were an artist already before creating Shikman as a character?
Well, I've forgotten that that's something I used to love doing as a kid. I used to draw and doodle. In fact, even in my notes everywhere when I go on courses, I end up doodling points and just to emphasize things. But I never considered myself an artist. And it was only in the last couple of years that I re-embraced the idea of, of being an artist. I felt like, being an artist is such a big label and it means this and that. What I've come to realize is being an artist is being a creative, and allowing that creative energy to flow through me.
So you were in the shadow of your hero's journey at that point. You were living in the identity. What was your identity back then before you embraced your true nature?
Wow, I guess my identity was Shookman. There was a lot of fear, and yeah, I suppose actually when I think about it now, what's obvious to me about my identity, there was a lot of hiding. That's what actually was going on. So externally, I was playing this cool, calm character, but underneath it all, there was the anxiety, the self-doubt, the hiding of my creativity and ideas. I mean, that in essence, to bring Shookman out into the open was a very difficult thing because it was bearing my soul. It was allowing people to see something that was going on inside me.
And how did you hide that? Like, what did you do in your life, in terms of what was your occupation and how you were living, and the thing, because often those parts of us draw us away because they can be very alluring, they can be very seductive, we can have very enjoyable lives in some way, and we might not be listening to that, or we
Mm.
in a lot of pain, but we still can't quite hear what our inner wisdom is giving us. So what did life look like to you on the outside?
So on the outside, what life looked like to me was I was working in my family business, which is care homes. And in 2012, my mum had passed away, and I had stepped into a managerial role within the care home. And at the time, I was like, okay, this is going to be like a temporary thing, and then I'll move on to something that I want to do, that I feel is in alignment with my own heart and truth. And then the years roll by, and I didn't feel like I could get out of it, or I could find a way out or create a way out. And what became apparent to me later, especially as I started learning about truth and heart and intuition, is that what essentially the way I operated was I felt like I didn't have my own authority. I wasn't allowed to express what I wanted, or it wouldn't be accepted. It would be rejected in the world. So I was very good at following, and I was very good at towing the line and people pleasing, and getting the job done. And there was a sense of consistency, keeping things the same. But then in terms of evolving, expressing, expanding, and expansion, I would shy away from that. In terms of putting myself out as an artist or saying, hey, these are my ideas, I could talk and I could share. I like, what was interesting is, looking back, is there were certain, the way I see it is like we all have certain talents or gifts, and I had certain talents or gifts, but I had nowhere to channel them. And so I could talk, but I didn't know, or I didn't, well, not that I didn't know what I wanted to talk about, I wouldn't allow myself to express what I really truly felt.
Where did that pattern start is my question. That pattern of complying and pleasing, and what would you say the origin of
It's
was?
difficult to really nail down exactly where it started, because at the same time, there was a side to me that always loved to explore and step outside of the box of experience and try different things. So it's almost like I've been trying to, the whole time I've been trying to find, there was like a battle between trying to express who I am, and at the same time reaching a limit, and then stepping back away from, almost like an electric fence, stepping away from that. And so I would say that was possibly how it's been for me for the longest time. Like that's how it was. So it was hard to notice in a way, because I would do these things. I would either go traveling. I went to China. I pretty much by myself. I traveled around China for a good three weeks by myself. This predates Google Maps. Like before then. And I do a sport called parkour, which is a lot about taking risks, but also moving in a different way outside the norms. But then at the same time, what was really apparent was, in my, let's say, vocation, I wasn't expanding. In terms of in my personal pursuits, I kind of, like, things just stayed the same. There's a lot of wheel spinning. That's how I learned. That's how I learned to understand what it was. It was a lot of sitting on the fence and undecidedness when it came to taking big actions towards things that I wanted to create and put into the world. So I would say, like, I think a lot of life up until university was almost on autopilot. And then after university, things become more apparent, because all of a sudden there's no structure
Yeah.
that I could hide inside of, or that I could excel inside of. I had to create my own.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to.
That's a really, you mentioned a few minutes ago about before I learned intuition. And that is a really interesting point, because I think a lot of us have the perception that intuition, well, I just have it. But there's a difference between that and actually learning how to harness it.
Yeah.
So obviously at some point you became aware of, hold on a minute, there's actually tools that I can apply that help me access my intuition, help me understand my intuition, so that I can actually apply it to my life, not just have it be a random point, because when it's random, it's almost like we pick up the threads, but sometimes we don't do anything with them. Do you like
Yeah.
to a little bit about that?
Well, I'd say the hardest thing about, I guess, yeah, I mean, learning about intuition was definitely important, but following intuition is a whole nother thing. so that's that. I think learning to, so what I truly learned was that I had a heart, that I had things that I loved, and starting to orientate and appreciate and accept those things, and to turn and face those things and say, oh, these are things that I enjoy. This is what I, because that's, it was tough for me to even like, even nowadays, sometimes I will share with people different ideas, and then they will reflect back, oh, this one you seem most excited about. But internally, to me, it sounds like I've expressed every single one the same. But they can hear, oh, you're really passionate about this one. And so it took me a while to reorientate towards and accept, what is it that I would love to do. I'd hidden it from myself.
You know, something I'm realizing that growing up, I had a really strong kind of perception that men didn't have feelings and they didn't have a heart. And I really see in our culture that is a kind of myth that's perpetuated a lot, you know, that men don't necessarily feel, and it's a lie. And I realized it was a lie some time ago, but you know, actually, for men and boys who are locked into, you know, a role, like you put it, you know, either being the bad boy or being the good boy or whatever it is, you know, to giving yourself the softness of sensitivity, because it's not something that's typically assigned to men. You know, it's kind of like, if you're soft, there's something wrong with you. If you're sensitive, there's something the matter. You know, I know when my boys were little and they used to go to school and they'd be surrounded by their male friends, it was a toughening up thing. It was a, you know, like you didn't really want to show that side. And I see in schools, and I've spoken with teachers where it's like, yeah, be free to express yourself. And then the minute you do, you're. Mm-hmm. So we live in a culture that's full of mixed messages. And it's a process to learn to hold on to ourselves and to validate ourselves and go with our heart and go with our intuition and go with our sensitivity, rather than give that away or ignore it or bury it or hide it. How does the creation of Shukman serve men and boys in particular in showing their heart in the world, in a world that often is so rejecting of men in that way, and constantly enforces messages of be strong and be tough and toughen up, and because those are still messages that thing today.
Yeah, there's a redefinition of the idea of what it is to be strong. I believe that, and this is imbued in my work, that when we can be vulnerable, then we are truly strong. And what I mean by vulnerable is to be able to express how we think and feel, and to be okay with all emotions, and to be vulnerable to our experiences, because then we become resilient. Whereas if you're completely stiff, then and you know, as a human, just holding emotions or holding them down and suppressing them, that's going to metastasize into other things and become a separate issue, like whether it turns into depression or, you know, something more physical. So through Shukman, it's about creating an awareness of our emotions, and firstly bringing some light to that side of us, and that's what Shukman does very well. That's the first thing. The second thing, there's two more things. The second thing is it allows community when we are talking about Shukman, that we can share it with others, and then we actually realize that others are experiencing the same things that we are, And if others are experiencing the same things we are, then actually, who's the weird one? Like who's wrong? No one. We're all the same. And that's one of the beauties of what I'm doing at the moment and working with children is just showing them that, you know what, we're all having these emotions, all of us, parents, adults, kids, your peers, all of us, right? And then the third thing is that when we can truly embrace that side of life, then we can also truly embrace the other side. So if we can truly embrace our sadness and our angers and our fears, then we can also embrace our joys, our happiness, and our love. Because if we're denying one side, then it also blocks us off from experiencing the other side. That's something that I found. You know, the common phrase is "as above, so below," but and especially in emotions. If you can't experience your sadness, then can you truly experience your joy? Because there's almost they're on the same spectrum, and when we limit ourselves, we kind of limit ourselves to that sort of middle ground, and then it kind of feels embarrassing. And I know I had this a lot. It feels embarrassing to be joyful. It's like, oh, I'm acting out, or people are noticing me, or if I'm too happy and I don't want to be noticed, or something like that, right? So these are three areas, helping people to understand themselves, helping people to grow empathy for others and themselves and self-compassion for themselves, and then allowing us to actually truly experience joy as well.
So how is that that you bring this to schools or children?
Yeah, so what I've created is a workshop which is in 4 parts, and the initial process is to essentially open the door of emotions and get them talking and get them experiencing and recognizing their own story. And at the same time, because it's done in groups, they're then seeing others and they're hearing others share. And a common thing I've heard so far is kids saying it's cool to hear other people have the same thoughts and feelings that they do about similar things. And even better when it's often someone that they look up to, because they often assume that others are better in some way, or more confident, or less sensitive, or stronger. And actually they realize that they're just like I am. And then in the process of all this, I then introduce them to the idea of joy. So they get to experience both sides of the coin of emotions, and recognize how emotions have a great power. Well, 2 things: emotions and imagination. But emotions have a great power in driving our actions, and imagination is how we're able to transmute that, or how we're able to change and transform emotions, or choose, to put it simpler, to how to choose where we want to put our focus.
So talk about that a little bit, this the role imagination plays in transmuting emotion, because one of the things that I think of when I think of children is that they're just naturally joyful. They don't have a problem expressing joy, but actually that isn't really true, is it? Especially if you're a child who's experiencing a lot of pain in an area of, maybe your household or whatever it is. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that distinction, that imagination is a portal to transmute emotion.
Yeah, so the first thing is getting them to appreciate that their fears are mostly in their imagination, because there are like real fears, ingrained fears of heights, fears of a lion chasing us, these things. But rarely in society are we faced with either of those. Are we ever really in danger of falling off something? And unless you've climbed up somewhere, nor are we in danger of a lion or something chasing us. So therefore, I make the distinction for them that most of their imagination exists in their heads, exactly where Shookman exists. And so they all appreciate Shookman lives in their imagination. And if Shookman represents their fears, then therefore their fears exist in their imagination. I don't make it a point in the course other than to mention it in the material, but I see imagination as being the most powerful tool that they have, and I share that with them throughout. I talk about that and how that allows them to choose, and their ability to imagine things is what allows them to create what they want in their life. So for kids at this stage, when I'm asking them what their goals are, I let them say whatever. I've had kids say to me they would like to sit on the rings of Saturn. They'd like to be a kid forever, or all these things that if an adult said it, you'd be like, well, I'm not so sure. But then, what I've realized is by letting them do that, we can then play with their thoughts and feelings around that and start to get into how they really think and feel.
Beautiful. And so what are some of the blossomings that you're witnessing in the children as a result, like after they've participated in this? What does it open up for them?
I think one of the most beautiful things is the compassion that they have for themselves and others. That's like one of the things that one child said to me when I asked them about, like, what's been the biggest shift. They said they noticed that everyone that had done the course was the words that they used was less of a bully.
Yeah.
And so that gave me the impression that, our kids are like always taking the mick out of each other. So, that gave me the impression that actually, yeah, so they were taking less of the mick. They were less on that side of things and more appreciative and aware of each other's feelings.
So one of the things that really lit up for me when I first contacted you was this. I just had this hit of Shukman being like a cartoon character, or, on a network that can be shared out there in the world so that more children have access to this. And I'd love to hear about your creative process and what's unfolding, and what do you see for Shukman? And I want to say, it might sound really weird, but I get this kind of Shukman penetrating into the conscious awareness of children everywhere.
Yeah, when I first had the idea of Shugman, the idea originally was a comic book. Yeah, there was a comic book idea, and that was, when we talk about intuition, that was the very first ever intuitive reading experience, that I'd ever had, and it was around business, and I had this sense that my business would be around comics or cartoons or something of the sort. And so that's always been in the back of my mind, and that actually is the bigger vision for Shukman. The idea of where I'm at now, teaching workshops, that wasn't even necessarily in my plan to begin with. Though I always had a joy for teaching and sharing things that I've learned, I never thought to myself, I'm going to start off by teaching kids. But what's obvious to me now is that in terms of getting Shukman out into the world, teaching children, especially at the age of between 8 to 10 or 8 to 12, that very formative age, that's where they really appreciate the lessons and the awareness and talking about emotions. And it's a very pivotal point in their lives because they're moving from primary to high school. And so they go from a more of a smaller community to a much larger community where all their thoughts and feelings and interactions with others just kind of expands, or their whole world expands quite rapidly. So what I'm seeing in the long term, I'm just connecting the dots, as you may have heard, right? Like connecting the dots, looking back. But what's obvious to me at this point is, or at least what I believe is obvious to me at this point, is I'm creating community here. I'm teaching the children from the ground up, and the ideas of Shukman stories and films and cartoons and comics. I feel like that's definitely all in the much bigger vision, and I'm quite happily sitting inside of a 10-year, of like a 10-year vision, to see all of this materialize. Could happen faster. It might, could happen slower, but that sort of long-term vision of Shukman. And I've written a few short stories. I've studied. I've gone and studied screenwriting and all these things. I wouldn't say I'm like another like Steven Spielberg or something like just yet, but in terms of learning and following the path, I'm following the path and seeing what unfolds.
Yeah, that's so gorgeous. And I see it as something that's just inevitable. It just feels so inevitable, and a wonderful opportunity for people in broadcasting to realize a partnership with you that would be deeply beneficial and hasn't really had a voice up to this point in the mainstream.
Yeah, I realized, because even as I look around at the moment, there are no other creations that are quite like Shookman. There are obviously kids' books and that have characters in them, but none of them are quite like what I've created and as a singular point of focus to talk about these topics.
Yeah, well, there's something to that, in that really, sometimes you can get ideas that have been born elsewhere, and then someone tries to adapt it. But what's missing is the energy of the heart, which is so intense and it can't be substituted. And that's why sometimes you'll see productions, and you can feel the energy. You can feel the juiciness and the creativity and the connection and the vibe and the love in it. And then in other things, it's like a sunken hole. There's nothing there. It's like the energetic imprint has been removed. And this is something in business that I feel is really important for us going forward, because we have created a society where a lot of it has been diluted. And, speaking about this already, about reclaiming with another guest, the reclaiming of our gifts and our talents and our intuitive insights as human beings that we so often suppress because we want to fit in, or we want to belong, or we don't feel worthy, or one other, or any combination of that, And then when we move from that place, we can still create very powerful results, but the impact is just nowhere close to the same.
Yeah, that's definitely been my journey and experience with what I'm doing now, So I feel like so much, especially when I felt out of touch with my own truth and creativity, it's like seeking anything that could potentially make money.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, oh, actually, I'd love to, of course, money's great, and I'd love to do that with heart, like with joy in what I'm doing. And I see that with Shookman. Like I'd happily turn up and deliver talks on Shookman and do that for free. And that's the thing for me, is like recognizing, and I'd have to say that has also been a huge part of my own journey, in recognizing that pattern, that tendency to kind of focus on the outcome over focusing on the journey and focusing on the building and the infusing of enjoyment. And so even as I journey down this road of teaching others about this, that's something that I have recognized in myself. It's easy in this world to focus on the quick, like, the quick money making schemes, or being rich, or getting to the end of a, how big could Shookman be? But then instantly it loses its, as you say, its spark, its heart. And so part of the journey is being able to just keep myself focused on what is it I actually enjoy, and keep doing that and keep creating. And I do find the more I'm doing that, like, even opportunities like speaking on this podcast are unfolding, because it's coming from the right place.
As I'm listening to you, what I'm hearing you say is really about potency. Potency of what you're bringing, and holding the integrity of that potency so that it can be sustained, not just short-term win, or long-term legacy.
Yeah, like even the idea of, say, someone copying something, and then now I can appreciate, especially through doing this work, like what it takes to create something with substance. And that really, requires multiple levels of, one, of like putting something out, but also what we're willing to bring to the table. And it's been a journey for me to get to this level of appreciation, and so now for me it's a choice of holding myself there and enjoying the work. I really do. I've reorientated that as well, and in a sense of appreciating where, and what I mean when I say that is, there's obviously a part of me that seeks validation, that seeks to be recognized. I'd say that will be in that version of me that didn't know who his heart was, and so he would seek validation and seek to be praised or looked up to. But the work with Shookman is not about that. It's about sharing something that I feel is true, something that's helped me, and I really believe that can help many others.
I'd love to hear what you're saying there about seeking validation, because in a way, validation by itself is not a bad thing. It's just that what you're saying there is from within you. You're not seeking it. Is that?
Yeah, so I would say like my own version of Shookman, my personal identity, in terms of like the more the shadow side is the one that's like seeking to be recognized, seeking to in this world today with like social media and followers and likes and all that, it becomes about that, and it becomes about being perceived a certain way, as opposed to actually recognizing that we are whole and we are complete, and sharing what I'm doing from a space of like, this is something that I enjoy and I love doing.
There's something there around the creative journey when we are creative. And because we want to be, I've seen my son go through this a little, it's like he's very creative in music and he follows that. And we had this whole conversation about following his weird rather than making stuff that's he thinks other people want to hear.
Right. Yeah.
And he's always been on that trajectory. But I think for creatives in general, that's a journey in itself, learning to hold that rather than give over to it and feel that you have to, because you have to make a living or you have to survive somehow.
Yeah, that's a constant in this world now, I'd say, because especially now with, say, like social media, there's all these rules and boxes that you got to tick in order to put your content out or gain followers, and so you could easily, I mean, and back in the day, it would have been marketing on its own, how to market your product or how to get noticed and get more people buying your products. And so I feel like that's a constant in the world out there. Like, it's a constant that kind of pull towards doing what others want from you. And I suppose some of that is required, like some of that in terms of meeting your customers' needs. But then the ability to be original requires you to be original, to be without that, without having to copy or follow others, and to know what it is in your heart to be able to express. And I think that's why when I think of what it is to be an artist, that's what I enjoy about that. And even with intuition, why I personally felt like it was a useful and one of the best things that I've come across in terms of how to navigate my life, is because it allowed me to be original. It gave me a pathway to recognize what my truth was and what my talents are, and to follow that. Because
That's
without it, I was
yeah,
just going to say, without it, like, I speak to loads of different people, and without it, it can be very much a kind of like copycat world.
yeah, that's such a valid point about the power of intuition being the thing that enables us to access what is truly unique about us, what is our gift that we bring. And there's no finding it out there.
Mm,
It's already within.
mm,
It's a matter of listening.
yeah.
So presumably schools can contact you and they can engage with you to enjoy this experience of Shookman for their own children.
Yeah. So I've started teaching in schools, and I've started because I'm literally starting on my own at the moment. So I've started in my local area in east of London, or in London in general. But I do have a vision of expanding out and getting others involved in future. So yeah, it's so for now I'm sort of building it around this area, and then I will continue to build outside.
Lovely. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and sharing with me about what you're creating. And I'm really excited to see what unfolds in the coming time.
Yeah, in the next decade. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a really insightful and interesting conversation, and even for me to reflect on certain parts of my journey that I haven't thought of for a while. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. If you loved this episode, share it and subscribe to the podcast. If you'd love to get in touch with Ahmad, visit the show notes where you'll find links to his website. If you'd love to reach me about my clarity sessions, also follow the show notes where you'll find the links to get in touch with me. Thank you for being with us.